Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. When I first moved into my new house, I was excited to finally have a backyard where I could build a nice storage shed. The previous owners had let the yard go, so there was a lot of work to be done to get it looking nice again. After a few weeks of intensive landscaping, I had transformed the overgrown mess into a cozy little oasis, complete with a flower garden, stone pathway, and plenty of room for my new shed. I ordered one of those prefab sheds you can get delivered in a kit. My brother and I spent a weekend assembling it, and after we were done, I was thrilled with how it turned out. The neutral beige color blended in nicely with the newly refreshed yard. I outfitted the interior with sturdy wooden shelves to hold all my gardening tools and equipment. For the first few months, the shed was just what I had hoped for. It kept everything neat and organized. But of course, nothing that brings me happiness can last too long around here. Not with the Homeowners Association board members lurking around. Let me back up a bit and explain about the Homeowners Association here. When I purchased the house, I didn't realize there was a Homeowners Association. From my unpleasant introduction to them, I gathered that the Homeowners Association had been pretty laid back in the past, but recently some new members had joined the board, including a woman I'll call Karen. And Karen made it her personal mission to strictly enforce the most minor rules and regulations. Shortly after I moved in, Karen came knocking at my door with a clipboard listing all my violations. Most were total nonsense. My mailbox was the wrong color. My porch decor wasn't allowed, things like that. But Karen insisted everything must be corrected or I would face fines. I tried to push back politely at first. I explained that I hadn't been aware of these rules, but she refused to cut me any slack as a new homeowner. She threatened me with increasing fees and penalties unless I complied. I quickly realized Karen meant business, and I didn't want to make an enemy of her right off the bat. So I begrudgingly made the small changes to appease her. I hoped that would be the end of our conflicts, but sadly it was only the beginning. Karen swung by frequently to critique my compliance with Homeowners Association regulations. She seemed to find problems everywhere she looked. If my grass grew half an inch too tall, she reported it. If a package got left on my porch for more than an hour, she threatened to fine me for it. No matter how hard I tried to follow Karen's obsessive rules, I just couldn't seem to satisfy her. Until the day she set her sights on my storage shed. I was working in the front yard when I saw Karen coming down the sidewalk with her clipboard in hand. She stopped in front of my house and called out, "Your shed is looking a little weathered. When are you going to paint it?" I straightened up from the flower bed with a trowel still in my hand. "Oh, I wasn't aware it needed painting yet," I replied, trying to sound polite. "It's only been up for a few months." Karen frowned and scribbled a note on her clipboard. "All exterior structures must be kept looking new. The shed needs a fresh coat of paint. I'll give you 2 weeks to complete the work." I fought the urge to fling my trowel at her. The shed did not look bad at all. She was inventing problems just to flex her authority, but I held my tongue and continued gardening as Karen walked away. Over the next few days, I tried to come up with a compromise. I really didn't have the time or money to paint the whole shed right now. But I also knew Karen would rain down penalties on me if I didn't comply. So, I came up with a plan to just paint the most visible side that faced the street. That should be enough to get Karen off my back, I hoped. But the day before my deadline, I arrived home from work to find my shed in flames. The fire department was working to extinguish it, as Karen stood nearby pretending to look concerned. I leaped out of my car and ran over, shouting at Karen over the roar of the hoses. "What the hell happened?" I demanded. "Well, I stopped by to do a pre-inspection for your paint job," Karen explained with faux sympathy. When I looked inside the shed, I noticed serious fire code violations. There were flammable solvents and chemicals improperly stored. I told the other board members and we agreed an emergency inspection was necessary. Unfortunately, the ignition source was still unknown. I wanted to wring Karen's neck. She had obviously set the fire intentionally to force me into compliance. "That's complete bullcrap," I shouted at her. "You're telling me you just happened to do a sneak inspection without my permission, only to coincidentally discover dangerous materials that spontaneously combusted." Karen glared at me. "Watch your language! Yes, that is exactly what happened. This shed was a hazardous mess. We may send you the bill for the fire department response." I pointed at the smoking pile of rubble that used to be my shed. Do you really expect me to believe this was anything but arson? I lowered my voice and got right in Karen's pinched face. I know you did this. I'm going to the police and your fellow homeowners association board members. You're a psycho who just destroyed my property. Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained icy cool. I don't appreciate your wild accusations and threats. As I've told you before, you signed a contract agreeing to let the homeowners association enforce regulations. I was simply performing an inspection according to the rules. If you have an issue, you'll have to bring it up at the next board meeting. She knew I had zero evidence against her. It was my word against the president of the Homeowners Association Board. Karen strolled away without another glance at my smoking, ruined shed. Over the next few days, I debated how to proceed. I filed a claim with my home insurance and gave a statement to the fire department. But without proof, Karen was off the hook. That scheming pyromaniac had abused her power and destroyed my property just to flex her control over me. And she was ready to do it again if I didn't comply with her obsessive demands. Well, if Karen wanted to play dirty, I would have to fight fire with fire. Time to give her a taste of her own medicine. I rented a small backhoe, then waited for the perfect moment to commence my revenge. The very next time Karen left her house, I cranked up the machine. As she drove away, I rolled up to her immaculate home and began tearing up her front lawn. I dug deep, wide trenches across her perfectly manicured grass. Without hesitation, I plunged the scoop into her prized rose bushes, reducing them to a pile of shredded mulch. I then took aim at Karen's ostentatious water feature and smashed it to bits with the hydraulic arm. Water poured everywhere, mixing with the piles of dirt. I surveyed my handiwork and nodded with satisfaction. My next stop was the community clubhouse parking lot. Still seething with anger, I drove the backhoe through the doors of Karen's beloved clubhouse. I crushed her exercise equipment beneath the huge tires and demolished the rest of the interior furnishings. Finally, I parked the backhoe right in the middle of the lot and abandoned it there with the keys in the ignition. Let the Homeowners Association Board deal with this mess. I wished I could see the look on Karen's face. But I had done enough damage to get my revenge. The very next day, I installed a tall, solid privacy fence all around my entire property. I knew it violated Homeowners Association rules, but now I was at open war with Karen. She could threaten me all she wanted, but if she tried to burn down this fence like she did my shed, she would be committing arson in broad daylight. Soon enough, Karen came marching up my driveway with the police in tow. She pointed furiously at my fence while unleashing a barrage of threats and demands, but I simply waved cheerfully and told the officers I didn't consent to any searches or inspections of my private property without a warrant. They were powerless to intervene on behalf of the Homeowners Association without evidence of a crime. Karen was practically foaming at the mouth. She condemned me as an uncooperative homeowner jeopardizing the community's property values. I just shrugged and said if anyone was jeopardizing values around here, it was the Arsonist Homeowners Association president. Without proof, the police warned Karen against any retaliation before leaving empty-handed. She knew I had her beat. Any further harassment from her would land her in legal trouble with the authorities instead of me. In the following weeks, I erected more rule-breaking structures in my yard: a pool, a large tool shed, and an outdoor kitchen. Karen and her cronies on the Homeowners Association Board tried every trick in the book, from fees to threats to another attempted police call-out. But I stood my ground, ignoring their desperate attempts to regain control. Finally, a petition circulated through the neighborhood to disband the Homeowners Association entirely. Karen had become a deranged dictator who abused her power and made people's lives hell. Homeowners were fed up and wanted out. On the day of the vote to dissolve the Homeowners Association, I wheeled a grill into my front yard and set up lawn chairs. As my neighbors arrived at the community center to cast their ballots, I greeted them with cold drinks and hot dogs. I even hung a big banner on my illegal fence that read, "Say bye to Homeowners Association tyranny." The voting was unanimous. Our neighborhood was finally free from the dysfunctional Homeowners Association and Karen's reign of terror. She knew her hateful behavior had backfired. Without an organization to hide behind, Karen was powerless. These days, my neighborhood feels like a community again. No more petty fines, harassing inspections, or power-hungry Karens. I even got a new storage shed built, this time in the middle of my backyard. The homeowners association rules are long gone, and none of my neighbors care one bit about my so-called violations. As for Karen, last I heard she had moved to a new neighborhood and immediately tried to get on their homeowners association board. Some people never learn, but I will always fondly remember the day I fought back against her crazy abuses of power. This homeowner certainly doesn't miss the homeowners association one bit. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I worked in a state senator's office alongside a very smart and capable woman. She served as the senator's aide, but only for part of the year. I'm fairly certain she didn't have a career beyond that role, yet she was incredibly capable. This woman would always surprise me with her accomplishments. For instance, she once casually mentioned attending a conference in Australia to deliver a speech, and I was taken aback, thinking, wait, what? My favorite story she shared was about how she dismantled her local PTA. In the United States, we have organizations known as parent-teacher associations. These are national organizations with local chapters for individual schools. Their primary purpose is to foster relationships between parents and teachers. However, they often devolve into groups where individuals, often likened to the stereotype Karen, impose unnecessary rules, overreact to minor issues, and generally cause disruptions. They're typically run by individuals who seem to thrive on creating and then solving problems, somewhat akin to an homeowners association for schools. This woman was the antithesis of a Karen. Instead of creating issues, she resolved them. She was deeply frustrated with the PTA at her children's school. The association was constantly causing disruptions and faced budgetary issues. Matters came to a head when the PTA began banning field trips and recess and misused fundraising proceeds and membership fees on administrative costs, among other concerns. That's when she decided she'd had enough. She joined the PTA, climbed its ranks, volunteered for every event, ran for office, and eventually became the president of the PTA. Using the bylaws and her newfound influence, she disbanded the chapter. The most impressive part? She then established her own local club to take the PTA's place, one free from the influence of a national parent organization and its bureaucracy. She successfully raised significant funds for exciting events, projects, and trips for the students. Her club operated far more efficiently than the PTA ever did. Thanks to her efforts, everyone at the school enjoyed a more harmonious environment. Truly, she was an extraordinary woman. The next one is a petty revenge story. Saw a couple who had filled their trolley with toilet roll arguing with an elderly couple who had asked for one packet because there wasn't any on the shelves and they'd ran out. These two were a right piece of work and being quite abusive to the elderly couple. I went over to the elderly couple and told them to finish their shopping and that I would come and find them. They go off and arsehole couple carry on what they're doing. When their backs are turned, I grab 2 packets out of their trolley, go and find the elderly couple and give it to them. I then went and found a shop assistant and told them about arsehole couple being abusive to the elderly, and when they get to the checkout, their trolley is taken off them and they're escorted out by security. This has made me extremely happy. The next one is a malicious compliance story. My dad was diagnosed with cancer last year. It's a severe type, cholangiocarcinoma, and by the time he was diagnosed, he was already at stage 4. Doctors estimated he had it for 2 years by then. Shortly after he informed me, I visited him where he resides, which requires a 2-leg flight from where I live and where our office is located, totaling almost 12 hours of travel from the originating airport to the destination airport. This visit was a year ago. Fast forward to a year later, I want to visit him again. He's managing with chemotherapy, but we're all bracing for any adverse event that might occur, after which things could become complicated and I might lose him. So I asked my employer if I could work from my dad's house. I'm running low on PTO. I live in the US, where most people receive 10 days a year of paid time off, excluding holidays, and since I already work from home, I assumed they would agree. However, my manager declined, stating I must use my PTO without providing a specific reason. I decided that spending time with my dad was more crucial, so I chose to use my PTO. A week before my flight, a project manager, different from my direct manager, contacted me. It turns out we have a client located just an hour's drive from my dad's place, and they require approximately 2 hours of on-site work. She inquired if I could spare a few hours to complete that task. I declined without offering an explanation. I sympathized with the project manager, and I usually support the idea of, since I'm here, I might as well complete this task now to save resources later. However, since my manager instructed me not to work, I won't. If they had permitted me to work from my dad's house, considering I already work remotely and my dad has a reliable internet connection, I would have accepted the brief assignment. Now my company will need to purchase plane tickets and cover another technician's time and expenses, including travel, car rental, accommodation, and daily allowances. What could have been resolved in 4 hours of my time, 1 hour of travel each way and 2 hours of actual work, has now expanded into 26 hours, 2 12-hour travel durations and 2 hours of actual work, of another technician's time, in addition to the associated travel expenses. The next one is an entitled People Story. About 10 years ago, I had a metalworking project with 212-inch stainless steel tubing. When it was done, I had several feet left. I made a walkway guardrail and some other items, including large garden arches with plant shelves for my wife. My wife posted them on Facebook, and a random woman contacted her wanting to borrow one for a wedding arch. We didn't know her. She had seen the pictures and reached out to my wife. My wife explained that they were too big to move, but the woman showed up regardless. At first, she wanted to borrow it. I told her they were too large for a pickup truck. Being made of stainless steel, they were quite heavy. It took a forklift to put them in place, and they were anchored to the ground. She claimed she could arrange for someone to pick one up, and then asked if I could use a forklift to load it. I explained that I'd have to cut it loose from its anchors and re-weld it when it returned. I never intended to move it, and I would have to shift large landscaping stone blocks just to access it. She was insistent, saying she needed the arch or it would ruin her child's wedding. She then asked if I could paint it white. The advantage of stainless steel is that it doesn't need painting. It's challenging to sand, prep, prime, and paint polish stainless steel. After painting, the steel would need the sanding scratches polished out, which I wasn't willing to do, so I firmly declined. She resorted to begging, crying, accusing us of ruining her daughter's life, and even screaming. My wife suggested she could have one custom made for about $4,400 and get it painted elsewhere. However, the woman didn't want to pay. She expected us to lend it for free. After 2 weeks of silence, my wife called to tell me the woman was in our driveway with a group, a pickup truck, which the arch wouldn't fit into, and the county sheriff. The woman presented a receipt for both arches, priced at $200. It was clearly home-printed with no business details or signatures. She expected the deputy sheriff, whom I've known for 30 years, to enforce this sale. Her group was arguing aggressively with my wife, with the deputy trying to mediate. The woman was still screaming. I explained the situation to the deputy, who then spoke with my wife. He had to call in 2 more deputies for backup before they could remove the group from our property. I don't know how the wedding went, but it certainly didn't feature my wife's arches. I would never consider moving 4,000-pound stone blocks, damaging my yard, using a cutting torch to free the arches, transporting my forklift from my shop to my home, and then reversing the process just to lend the arches to someone. On a brighter note, the arches did inspire some friends. There have been 2 sets of wedding photos taken under them, but the arches remained in place with no drama from any momzillas. The next one is an entitled Parent Story. So my wife and I have 2 kids, a nearly 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. We won a cruise to the Bahamas for 2, meaning the kids couldn't go. My mother volunteered to watch the kids. Great, it's all settled. We're going to get away for a week and have some time for ourselves. As the date approached, Mom started talking about having the kids at her house for the week. We told her we were under the impression that she was going to be at our house. All the kids' stuff is here. Our home is a single story and easy to track the kids in. It's significantly closer to all of their doctors for emergencies. We're talking 20 minutes versus an hour and a half. And our house is baby-proofed while hers is not. So we said we really felt they should be at our house. And if that didn't work for her, we would make other arrangements. She said our house was fine, but days later she mentioned she would prefer her house because my siblings, who still live with her, could help watch the kids. These are the same siblings we were told needed instruction on how to be nice to toddlers, which is why we weren't invited to Thanksgiving. We declined, saying we'd arrange support through our own channels, people we know and trust, who can pop in to offer relief and assistance. We left for our trip. However, as we were showing Mom where everything was and going over food and snacks, She seemed more interested in playing with the kids than learning where the diapers were. On the first day of the cruise, my wife used the boat's internet to video call and check on the kids. Everything seemed fine, but my mother told her not to call again for the rest of the trip, because it might upset the children. My wife didn't tell me about that part of their conversation right away, but as soon as she did, we called her back. When she answered, she was at her house with the kids, and we could see brand new kids' apparel and items in the background. I asked her what happened, and she said she was very sick and thought she had norovirus. Feeling extremely nauseous, she managed to call her brother, who lives 5 minutes from us, to pack the kids into my wife's car and drive an hour and a half to her house. I said, "So you were so sick that you couldn't watch the kids, but you could drive home in a car that wasn't yours and endanger kids that aren't yours. What if you passed out or started vomiting while on the freeway, potentially harming our children? Why didn't you call the list of people who said they'd help? Some had set aside parts of their weeks to assist, and one even stayed in a hotel to be nearby in case of an emergency. Now they're far from home and unaware of what's happening." Her initial response was that she truly was sick. I never accused her of not being sick, though I had my doubts. She then said I had no right to judge her decisions, that she didn't have to justify herself to me, and that she wasn't obligated to watch my kids. I told her to take my kids home, as someone else would watch them. When she dropped the kids off, she was rude to their new caretakers. Once I knew the kids were safe, I sent her a message saying she clearly didn't respect us as parents. It doesn't matter how many kids she raised, these are ours. We have the right to know what's happening with our children. Any responsible person would have called and asked us what to do before taking such actions. If roles were reversed, she would have been furious, and I know this because I've seen her react before. She didn't need to see the kids again if she was going to undermine us, and then act immaturely when confronted. The next day she replied saying she didn't realize her actions were so far out of expected parameters and acknowledged that parents have their own rules. However, she never apologized. We blocked her on social media and haven't spoken to her since. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.